Asynchronous programming is letting a piece of code run separately from rest of your code or the main flow of execution. It forms the basis of what makes all real-time application, especially in the web, possible today. To perform asynchronous operation in Dart, the main programming language for the Flutter framework, we use future class and the async and await keywords. A future with lowercase f is an instance of the future class. Note here that the future class is spelled with a capitalized F here, going by the notation of the Dart language. A future represents the result of an asynchronous operation and can have two states, uncompleted or completed. In the case of uncompleted state, when you call an asynchronous function, it returns an uncompleted future. That future is waiting for the function's asynchronous operation to finish or to throw an error. If the asynchronous operation succeeds, the future completes with a value, otherwise it completes with an error. A future of type future angle bracket t completes with a value of type t. For example, a future with type future angle bracket string produces a string value. If a future doesn't produce a usable value, then the future's type is future angle bracket void. If the asynchronous operation performed by the function fails for any reason, the future completes with an error. Now let us look at the concepts in action by considering an example where we are fetching username corresponding to an email ID from an online server. I'm going to write my code inside dartpad, which you can find by clicking on the first link after searching dartpad on the Google. And in this we are going to make a user defined function. Let us call it fetch username, which will take a string as its parameter, and let us call that string as email ID. As we know that the application of this function is to fetch a username, so it will return a string value. So let us make the return value of this function a string, and now we need to write the function definition. Before we can fetch a username, we require a database. And to simulate database inside this example, I'm going to use the map data structure and make it a runtime constant. So this map data structure will have key and value pair of type string, and I will call this map data structure as DB, which is short for database. And now I'm going to provide some dummy data here so we can work with, so I can give you an example. Let the dummy email ID be temp1@email.com, and the corresponding username to that email ID be username1. Similarly, we can provide other dummy data, and I'm not going to be creative here and just call the email IDs as temp1, temp2 and temp3, and the corresponding username as username2 and username3. Other thing that we require is a variable to store our result, and I'm going to call that variable as username only, which will initially be empty. Once it finds a corresponding username to that email ID, it will have the value of the username. Now we need to check if the email that we provide as the parameter exists inside our database or not. We can do that by using the contains key method of the database of the maps data structure, which will take one argument, and as we know that our key values inside our database are email, so we will provide email here. Now if this expression comes out to be true, then we need to make our username variable equal to the value present at the email ID inside our database. And to make sure that the value is not null, we are going to put a exclamation mark over here so that we can reaffirm Dart that this value cannot be null. Oh, I'm getting an error here because this value cannot be final, as it can change later. Now finally we just need to return the username. But hang on a second, this cannot be true, because when we are working with real-time application, the database will not return a value instantaneously. It will return the value after some amount of time. We can simulate that delay by using the delayed method of the future class, which takes in two arguments. The first argument of the delayed function is the duration by which we need the action to be delayed by. So let me give the duration as 5 seconds here. It can really vary, but I'm just going to give it a 5 seconds here. And the second argument is the callback function. We can make another function to refer inside the callback function, but I'm going to use an anonymous function here. And inside the anonymous function, now we can provide any action that would be completed after 5 seconds. Here I'm going to make sure that if the username is not empty, then I just return the username here. And if it is empty, then I need to throw an exception. So I'm going to throw an exception using the exception object, and I'm going to give it a message as email address not found. Once we return the future, it doesn't return a value of type string, rather it returns a value of type future angle bracket string. So we need to make a return type of the function as future angle bracket string, and now this error will go away. So now what is this function doing? It is basically what we are trying to convey here is that we will first of all provide an email ID to this function. It will search it inside the database, and if it does contains the username, then it will return that value after 5 seconds. If it doesn't contains the value, then it will return an exception saying that email address not found. Now we can head over to our main function and make a call to this fetch username function. We are going to take input from the user, which can be a text field in a real application, but here I'm going to be lazy and just make it a runtime constant. Let's call it email input. Initially I'm going to give it a valid input that we know that exists inside the database. So let me make it temp1@email.com. Now once we have the email input, we need to make the call to the fetch username, and we need to store the result inside another variable. Let me call that variable as the founded username. It's rather complicated variable name, but I think it serves the purpose here. So I'm going to make a function call here to fetch username, and I'm going to provide the argument as email input. And finally we need to print the result to the console, where we will give a message saying that the username corresponding, let me spell the corresponding correctly, the username corresponding to our email input is the result founded inside the founded username. And we'll print that to the console. Let us run this function and see what is the result. As you can see, we are getting no error and an output. Rather than getting a username, we are getting an instance of future string. That happens because we are not waiting for the future here. Rather, we are making the value of founded username as an uncompleted future. So we need to wait for the future to complete here. We can do that by using the await keyword. And to use an await keyword inside any function, we need to make the function an asynchronous function. We can make any function as asynchronous by using the async keyword before the curly braces. Now that the main function is asynchronous, it will return in a future. However, we are not returning any usable value from our main function, so we can make it a future angle bracket fault. Now we are going to run this application again and see what is the output. Notice here that before producing an output to the console, it is waiting for 5 seconds, and then it is giving us the correct output saying that the username corresponding to temp1email.com is username 1. As we can see inside our database, it is correct, so we are getting the correct output here. So what we needed to do was to await for the future to complete, which we were able to achieve by using the await keyword. And to await keyword, we require to make our function as asynchronous. We were able to do that by using the async keyword here before the curly braces. And once the function is asynchronous, it needs to return a future of any type. However, we are not returning any future here. So we have just made it a future angle bracket of type void. But there is one more thing we need to do here. Let us give an invalid code again. As we can see here, we are getting a runtime error because the user email ID was not found inside the database. But if we are not handling this error, then our application will stop abruptly and the user will not able to proceed further, and he or she would have a terrible user experience. So now we need to handle the error. We can handle that error by using the try and catch syntax. So I'm going to wrap this amount of code inside the try and catch syntax, and I'm going to catch for an exception, and I will call that exception as E, and I will just print that exception to the console if I catch any. Let me just format it first. Okay, now let me run this code again and see how it works. The user is able to perform further actions without closing the app or anything else. Hope you were able to understand the concept clearly, and if you have any doubts, let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching the video, and like and subscribe, that can help out a ton.